A blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Margaret Lawson trudged across the parched Texas landscape, her swollen feet leaving faint impressions in the dusty earth. Each step sent jolts of pain through her exhausted body, but the thought of her 3-year-old daughter waiting with a neighbor back in Austin kept her moving forward. 6 days since burying her husband, and already the world seemed determined to break what little remained of her spirit. It was May of 1876, and Margaret had never felt more alone. At 26, she had already weathered more heartache than most endured in a lifetime. Her husband Thomas had been taken by typhoid fever, leaving her with a small child, mounting debts, and a home she could no longer afford. The promise of work at her cousin's boarding house in San Antonio had been her only hope until the stagecoach had left without her when she couldn't produce the full fare. "Just 10 more minutes," she whispered to herself, though she had been saying the same thing for hours. Her once sturdy boots had fallen apart 15 miles back, forcing her to discard them. Now her bare feet were cracked and bleeding, each step leaving tiny crimson droplets on the hard-packed dirt road. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Margaret glanced at the darkening sky with dread. A storm was brewing, and she had nowhere to seek shelter on this empty stretch between towns. Clutching her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, she pushed forward, ignoring the rumble of distant thunder. As twilight deepened into night, the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Margaret's pace quickened despite her fatigue, eyes desperately scanning the landscape for any sign of shelter. The road ahead disappeared into darkness, and for the first time since beginning her journey, true fear gripped her heart. "Please, Lord," she whispered, "don't let me die out here. Charlotte needs me." The rain came harder now, plastering her dress to her skin and washing away the dust from her face. Her long brown hair, once her pride, hung in sodden ropes around her shoulders. Each flash of lightning illuminated the barren landscape, revealing nothing but emptiness in all directions. Then, in the brief brightness of the next lightning strike, she saw a faint golden glow in the distance. A window, perhaps, or a lantern. Hope surged through her weary body, giving her legs new strength. Margaret stumbled toward the light, slipping in the mud that formed beneath her bare feet. The rain became a torrent, and she could barely see more than a few feet ahead, but that distant glow remained her beacon. As she drew closer, the silhouette of a small ranch house emerged from the darkness, smoke curling from its chimney despite the downpour. She approached the wooden porch, her entire body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Gathering her last reserves of strength, Margaret raised a fist and knocked on the door. The sound seemed feeble against the roaring storm, so she knocked again, harder this time. The door swung open, spilling warm lamplight onto the porch. A tall man stood in the doorway, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. His eyes widened at the sight of her drenched, barefoot, and clearly at the end of her endurance. "Good Lord, madam," he said, lowering his weapon immediately. "What on earth are you doing out in this storm?" Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The warmth from the house, the relief of finding shelter, and the culmination of days of grief and hardship overwhelmed her. Her knees buckled, and the world tilted sideways. The last thing she remembered was the stranger lunging forward to catch her as darkness claimed her consciousness. When Margaret awoke, she was lying on a soft bed, wrapped in warm blankets that smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind, then memories of the storm and her desperate journey came flooding back. She tried to sit up but fell back against the pillow as dizziness swept over her. "Easy there," came a deep voice from across the room. "You've been through quite an ordeal." The man from the doorway sat in a wooden chair near a pot-bellied stove. He was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark hair streaked with gray at the temples and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were a striking blue, watching her with concern. "My name's Adam Evans," he said, setting aside the book he'd been reading. "You're safe now." "Margaret Lawson," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for taking me in." "Couldn't very well leave you out there to drown," he said with a slight smile. "Where were you headed, Mrs. Lawson, and why on foot in such weather?" The question brought reality crashing back. Charlotte. Her daughter was waiting for her return, and here she was, miles away and unable to continue her journey. "San Antonio," she said, struggling once more to sit up. This time, Adam moved to help her, adjusting pillows behind her back. "My cousin runs a boarding house there. She's offered me work and a place to stay. My daughter, she's with a neighbor in Austin. I need to earn enough to send for her." Adam nodded, his expression grave. "That's still a fair distance from here. My ranch is about 30 miles southwest of Austin." "I had no choice," Margaret said, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "My husband died last week. The bank is taking our home. The stagecoach left without me when I couldn't pay the full fare." She hadn't meant to divulge so much, but exhaustion had stripped away her usual reserve. Adam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he rose and walked to the stove, returning with a steaming mug. "Drink this," he said gently. "It's just broth, but it'll help." Margaret accepted the mug gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands before taking a careful sip. The rich flavor filled her mouth, and she realized how desperately hungry she was. "Your feet are in bad shape," Adam continued, settling back in his chair. "Walking barefoot for how long?" "About 10 miles, she admitted. "My boots fell apart yesterday." Adam shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and admiration crossing his features. "You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met, Mrs. Lawson." Despite everything, Margaret felt a smile tug at her lips. "Perhaps a bit of both, Mr. Evans." "Rest tonight," he said firmly. "Tomorrow, when the storm has passed, we can figure out how to get you to San Antonio." Relief washed over Margaret, and she felt tears threatening. She blinked them back, unwilling to appear any weaker than she already had. "I can't thank you enough." "No need for thanks. Just finishing this broth and getting some sleep would be thanks enough." As Margaret sipped the warm liquid, she took in her surroundings for the first time. The room was simply furnished but clean and well kept. A few books were stacked on a small table, and a rifle hung above the doorway. Through the window, she could see the rain still falling in sheets, illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning. "This is your room?" she asked, suddenly realizing she might have displaced her host. "It is, but don't worry about that. I'll be plenty comfortable by the fire in the main room." Margaret wanted to protest, but knew it would be futile. Besides, the bed was the first real comfort she had known in days, and her body cried out for rest. She finished the broth and handed the empty mug back to Adam. "Thank you, Mr. Evans, not just for the shelter and the broth, but for your kindness." Adam nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Get some rest, Mrs. Lawson, you're safe here." As he turned to leave, Margaret's eyes grew heavy. The sound of rain against the roof became a soothing lullaby, and she surrendered to exhaustion, falling into the deepest sleep she had known since Thomas fell ill. Morning arrived with gentle fingers of sunlight stretching through the window. Margaret awakened slowly, momentarily disoriented by her unfamiliar surroundings before remembering the events of the previous night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed clean world and the sweet scent of rain-soaked earth. She sat up carefully, wincing as the movement awakened pain in her feet. Looking down, she discovered they had been cleaned and bandaged while she slept. The sight brought a fresh wave of gratitude for her mysterious benefactor. The smell of coffee and something cooking drifted through the door, reminding Margaret how long it had been since she had eaten a proper meal. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and noticed a neatly folded bundle of clothing on the chair where Adam had sat the night before. A note lay on top in a firm, masculine hand. "These belong to my sister. They might fit you better than what you arrived in." Margaret touched the simple cotton dress with reverence. It was worn but clean and far sturdier than her own muddy, tattered garment. She changed quickly, grateful for the fresh clothing, though the dress hung a bit loose on her frame, evidence of the weight she had lost during Thomas's illness and the difficult days that followed. Standing proved challenging with her injured feet, but Margaret was determined not to appear helpless. She limped to the door and opened it, finding herself in a modest but well-organized main room that served as both kitchen and living area. Adam stood at a cast-iron stove, his back to her as he tended to something in a skillet. He turned at the sound of the door, his expression warming when he saw her. "Good morning," he said. "I was beginning to think you might sleep the whole day through. Can't say I would have blamed you." "What time is it?" Margaret asked, embarrassed at the thought of sleeping so late. "Just past 9, Adam replied, gesturing toward a small table set for two. "Coffee's hot and breakfast is nearly ready. Can you manage to walk, or would you prefer I bring it to you?" Pride warred with practicality in Margaret's mind. Her feet throbbed with each step, but the thought of being waited upon like an invalid was equally uncomfortable. "I can manage," she said, making her way carefully to the table. Each step was painful, but she kept her expression neutral, unwilling to reveal the extent of her discomfort. Adam watched her progress with a knowing look but said nothing, returning his attention to the stove. Minutes later, he placed a plate before her filled with scrambled eggs, bacon, and a thick slice of bread. "It's not fancy," he said, taking the seat across from her, "but it's filling." Margaret stared at the food, suddenly overwhelmed by this simple kindness. "It looks wonderful," she managed, her voice tight with emotion. "I haven't had a proper meal in. I can't remember how long." "Eat," Adam encouraged gently. "We can talk after." She didn't need to be told twice. Margaret ate with careful restraint at first, mindful of appearing too eager, but her hunger soon overcame propriety. Adam seemed pleased by her appetite, refilling her coffee without comment when she emptied the cup. When she had finished, Margaret felt more like herself than she had in weeks. "Thank you," she said, meeting Adam's gaze directly for the first time, "for everything." "You're welcome, Mrs. Lawson." "Margaret, please," she said. "After you've saved me from a storm and fed me breakfast, I think we can dispense with formalities." A smile creased the corners of his eyes. "Margaret, then. And I'm Adam." A moment of comfortable silence stretched between them before Margaret voiced the question that had been pressing on her mind. "You mentioned getting me to San Antonio." "I don't wish to impose further, but I've been thinking about that," Adam interrupted, his expression turning serious. "The storm washed out the lower road. It happens after heavy rains, and it'll be a few days before it's passable again." Margaret's heart sank. More delays meant more time away from Charlotte, more time without earning the money they desperately needed. "I see," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "There's another option," Adam continued. "I need to go into Austin tomorrow for supplies. I could take you there, back to your daughter. Then, when the road clears, perhaps I could help arrange passage for both of you to San Antonio." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Margaret found herself momentarily speechless. "Why would you do that?" she finally asked. "You don't know me." Adam considered her question, his blue eyes thoughtful. "My father taught me never to turn away someone in need. Besides, he added with a slight smile. "I admire your courage, walking all that way barefoot no less for your daughter's sake. That shows a strength of character that's rare these days." Margaret felt a blush warming her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you, but I didn't have much choice. When you're a mother, you do whatever is necessary." "Not everyone would have your determination," Adam insisted. "Now, about my offer, would you accept a ride to Austin tomorrow?" The sensible answer was an immediate yes, but Margaret hesitated. Her feet were in no condition for further walking, and the prospect of reaching Charlotte a day sooner was tempting beyond measure. Yet she had always been fiercely independent, even before Thomas's death had forced self-reliance upon her. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "Not now, anyway." Adam waved away her concern. "I'm not asking for payment." "Then perhaps I could work," Margaret suggested. "To earn my keep until tomorrow." A look of amusement crossed Adam's face. "With those feet, I don't think so." His expression softened at her evident discomfort with charity. "If it makes you feel better, you can help with mending. I have a pile of shirts that could use attention, and I never was much good with a needle." It was a transparent attempt to give her a way to salvage her pride, and Margaret appreciated it more than she could express. "That I can do," she agreed with a small smile. "Good. That's settled then." Adam rose from the table, collecting their empty plates. "Rest today. We'll leave early tomorrow for Austin." As Adam busied himself with the dishes, Margaret found herself studying him with curiosity. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor. Yet there was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. She wondered about his life here, alone on this small ranch, and how he had come to be the sort of man who would take in a desperate stranger without hesitation. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Adam glanced over his shoulder. "About 8 years now. Came here after the war, looking for a fresh start." "The war?" Margaret echoed softly. Like so many men of his generation, he had fought in the conflict that had torn the nation apart. "Were you with the Confederacy?" A shadow passed across his features. "No, madam, I fought for the Union." "Makes me something of an outsider in these parts, even now." Margaret wasn't surprised. Texas had been Confederate territory, and memories ran long in these communities. "That must be difficult." Adam shrugged. "Most folks judge me by how I treat them and their livestock, not by which side I fought for. But some don't forget, and they don't let me forget either." "Is that why you're out here rather than closer to town?" "Partly," he admitted. "And partly because I prefer the quiet. After the noise and chaos of war, there's something healing about the solitude." Margaret understood that sentiment all too well. After the frantic weeks of nursing Thomas, watching him fade despite her best efforts, she too had craved silence. But life as a widowed mother allowed little room for such luxuries. "You mentioned a sister," she said, changing the subject. "Does she live nearby?" Adam's expression grew distant. "Sarah died 3 years ago, childbirth fever. Her husband couldn't bear to stay afterwards, so he headed west. Left me her trunk of belongings, said he couldn't take the reminders." "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly, understanding the hollow ache of such loss. "It was hard," Adam acknowledged. "We were close. She was younger, always full of life." He set the last dish aside and turned to face Margaret fully. "What about you? You mentioned Austin. Is that where you're from originally?" Margaret shook her head. "St. Louis, actually. Thomas and I came to Texas 5 years ago. He had dreams of starting a cattle business. Things were going well until—" Her voice trailed off. "Until they weren't," Adam finished for her, his tone gentle. "Yes, the drought 2 years ago hit us hard. Thomas had to sell most of our stock. He took work as a clerk to make ends meet, but the pay was poor and the hours were long." When he fell ill, there was no money for a proper doctor. The familiar guilt rose in her throat. Maybe if we'd had more, he would have survived. Adam crossed the room and took the seat across from her again, his expression grave. "Don't do that to yourself," he said firmly. "Typhoid takes strong men in their prime, even with the best medical care. You did what you could with what you had." His words loosened something tight in Margaret's chest. She had been carrying that particular burden of guilt since Thomas's last breath, wondering if she could have done more, saved more, been more. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. Adam nodded once, then rose again. "I need to check on the livestock. You should stay off those feet. The mending is in that basket by the hearth if you're still determined to earn your keep." As he moved toward the door, Margaret called after him. "Adam," he turned, one hand on the doorknob. "Thank you, not just for the shelter and the food, but for—" She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the deeper gratitude she felt for his understanding, his lack of judgment. A smile touched his lips. "You're welcome, Margaret." After Adam left, Margaret made her way to the basket of mending. The simple domestic task was comforting in its familiarity, and she lost herself in the rhythm of needle and thread. Through the window, she could see Adam moving between outbuildings, tending to animals, repairing what appeared to be storm damage to a small shed. She watched him work, struck by the contrast between this quiet, competent man and her late husband. Thomas had been a dreamer, always full of grand plans and visions of prosperity just around the corner. He had been charming and ambitious, but practical matters often eluded him. Adam, from what little she had observed, seemed to be a man who dealt in realities rather than possibilities. The day passed peacefully. Adam returned at midday with fresh eggs and milk, preparing a simple but satisfying meal they shared at the table. Their conversation flowed more easily now, ranging from books they had read to memories of places they had been. Margaret found herself laughing at Adam's dry humor, surprised by how natural it felt after months of grief and worry. In the afternoon, a light rain returned, drumming softly on the roof as Margaret finished the last of the mending. Adam sat nearby, working on what appeared to be accounts in a leather-bound ledger. The domestic tableau struck Margaret suddenly how ordinary it seemed, how comfortable. It was a moment of normalcy she hadn't experienced since before Thomas fell ill, and she savored it quietly, knowing it was temporary. As evening approached, Adam prepared a stew that filled the cabin with savory aromas. They ate by lamplight, the rain still falling gently outside, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety within the small house. Margaret helped wash the dishes afterward, insisting despite Adam's protests that her feet were feeling much better. "We should leave at first light tomorrow," Adam said as they finished cleaning up. "It's a good 4-hour journey to Austin, longer if the roads are still muddy." Margaret nodded, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension filling her at the thought of returning to Austin. She longed to see Charlotte, to hold her daughter in her arms again, but returning also meant facing the reality of their situation, the lost home, the uncertain future. "I can't thank you enough for this," she said. "Taking me all the way to Austin is far beyond what anyone would expect from a stranger." "We're not exactly strangers anymore," Adam pointed out with a small smile. It was true, Margaret realized. In the span of a day, this man had gone from an unknown savior to something approaching a friend. There was an ease between them that defied the brevity of their acquaintance. "No, I suppose we're not," she agreed. "Still, your kindness is extraordinary." Adam seemed almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." That night, lying in Adam's comfortable bed, Margaret found herself thinking not of the journey ahead or even of the reunion with her daughter, but of the man sleeping by the fire in the next room. There was something about Adam Evans that spoke to her a steadiness, a quiet strength that resonated with her own determination to survive, to provide for her child against all odds. It was foolish, she knew, to feel this inexplicable connection to a man she had just met. Grief and desperation were playing tricks on her mind, making her see qualities that might not truly exist. Tomorrow she would return to Austin, to Charlotte, and Adam Evans would go back to his solitary life. Their paths had crossed briefly, nothing more. With that firmly in mind, Margaret closed her eyes and surrendered to sleep, pushing away the small voice that whispered this might not be the end of their story after all. Dawn broke clear and crisp, the storm having washed away both dust and heat. Margaret awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Adam moving quietly through the main room, preparing for their journey. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes, grateful for their warmth and durability compared to her own ruined garments. When she emerged from the bedroom, Adam was just finishing loading supplies into a canvas bag. He looked up at her approach, his expression warming. "How are the feet this morning?" he asked. "Much improved," Margaret replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. The cuts and blisters still stung, but the swelling had gone down considerably thanks to Adam's care. "Good. I've wrapped some biscuits for the journey," he said, gesturing to a cloth-covered bundle on the table. "And there's coffee if you want some before we leave." Margaret accepted the offered cup gratefully, savoring the rich, bitter taste. "Is there anything I can do to help prepare?" "Just enjoy your coffee. The wagon's nearly ready. I'll harness the horses and we can be on our way." As Adam stepped outside, Margaret took a moment to look around the small cabin that had provided such unexpected sanctuary. Despite its modest size and simple furnishings, there was an undeniable warmth to the place, a sense of care and attention that spoke of the man who lived within its walls. She finished her coffee quickly, then gathered the few possessions she had arrived with now clean and dry thanks to Adam's consideration. Her shoes were beyond repair, but Adam had provided a pair of his sister's boots that, while a bit large, would serve until she could find a replacement. Outside, the morning air held the fresh, clean scent that follows rain. Adam had brought a small wagon to the front of the house and was securing the last of their supplies. 2 sturdy horses stood in harness, occasionally stamping their feet in impatience. "Ready?" Adam asked, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. Margaret nodded, accepting his assistance. His hand was warm and calloused, the grip firm but gentle as he helped her navigate the step up with her still tender feet. Once settled on the wooden bench, she arranged her skirts while Adam climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a click of his tongue and a gentle flick of the leather straps, the horses set off down the muddy track that led away from the ranch. Margaret watched as the small house receded behind them, feeling an unexpected pang at leaving this brief haven. The journey to Austin took them through rolling hills dotted with mesquite and live oak, occasionally crossing streams swollen by the recent rains. Adam proved to be a skilled driver, navigating the treacherous mud with calm confidence. They traveled mostly in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by conversation about the landscape or memories of places they had known. "Tell me about your daughter," Adam said as they crested a hill that offered a sweeping view of the countryside below. Margaret's face softened at the mention of Charlotte. "She's 3, almost 4. Stubborn as the day is long and curious about everything. She has her father's eyes and, I fear, his penchant for mischief." Adam smiled at that. "Sounds like a handful." "She is," Margaret agreed fondly, "but she's also sweet and surprisingly thoughtful for her age. When Thomas was ill, she would bring him wildflowers every day, insisting they would make him feel better. The memory brought both warmth and pain. Charlotte had been too young to truly understand death, and explaining to her that her father was never coming home had been the most difficult conversation of Margaret's life. "She's staying with our neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy," Margaret continued. "A kind woman who offered to watch her while I sought work in San Antonio. I promised Charlotte I would send for her as soon as I could." "And now," Adam asked gently, "what will you do when you return to Austin?" It was the question Margaret had been avoiding asking herself. The plan to work at her cousin's boarding house had seemed the only viable option, but now, faced with returning to Austin instead, she felt adrift. "I don't know," she admitted. "Our home will be gone, the bank was clear about that. I have some skills sewing, cooking, basic bookkeeping. Perhaps I can find work locally," she sighed. "I only know I need to be with Charlotte. Everything else will manage somehow." Adam nodded, his expression thoughtful. "There's a growing need for skilled workers in Austin. The city's expanding rapidly. Someone with your abilities should find opportunities." The conversation lapsed into silence again as Margaret contemplated the uncertain future awaiting her. The road wound through increasingly populated areas as they approached the outskirts of Austin, the capital city of Texas. By midday, they were entering the town proper, with its mix of wooden buildings, busy streets, and the impressive stone structure of the Capitol building visible in the distance. "Where does Mrs. Abernathy live?" Adam asked as they navigated through the busy streets. Margaret directed him toward the eastern edge of town, where modest homes lined streets named for trees and former presidents. The neighborhood was familiar yet strange. She had last seen it under very different circumstances, departing with what few possessions she could carry, determined to find a way to provide for her daughter. As they turned onto Pecan Street, Margaret's heart began to race. The Abernathy home was just ahead, a neat white clapboard structure with a small porch and flower boxes in the windows. She hadn't expected to return so soon or at all, perhaps. What would she tell Mrs. Abernathy? How would she explain her failed journey and uncertain plans? Adam brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. For a moment, Margaret remained frozen on the seat, overwhelmed by the implications of her return. "Would you like me to wait here?" Adam asked quietly, sensing her turmoil. Margaret shook her head. "No, please come with me. I may need help explaining." Adam tied the horses to a hitching post and came around to help Margaret down from the wagon. Her feet protested the pressure, but the pain was a distant concern compared to the anxiety of the coming reunion. They had barely reached the porch steps when the front door flew open and a small figure burst out, golden curls flying. "Mama!" Charlotte cried, her face alight with joy. "You came back." Margaret dropped to her knees, heedless of the pain, and gathered her daughter into her arms. The solid weight of Charlotte against her chest, the familiar scent of her hair, the small arms wrapped tightly around her neck, it was everything Margaret had been longing for during their separation. "Of course I came back, my love," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I promised, didn't I?" Charlotte pulled back, her small hands coming up to wipe at Margaret's tears with solemn concentration. "Don't cry, Mama. I took good care of Dolly, just like you said." Margaret laughed through her tears. "I'm sure you did. These are happy tears, sweetheart." "I missed you so much." "I missed you too," Charlotte declared. Then, noticing Adam for the first time, she tilted her head curiously. "Who's that man?" Before Margaret could answer, Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway. The older woman's expression registered shock, then relief at the sight of Margaret. "Margaret, my goodness, we weren't expecting you back so soon. Is everything all right?" Margaret rose to her feet, keeping Charlotte's hand firmly in hers. "Mrs. Abernathy, I can't thank you enough for caring for Charlotte. This is Adam Evans, she added, gesturing toward him. He helped me when I encountered some difficulties on my journey. Mrs. Abernathy's sharp eyes took in Margaret's borrowed dress, her bandaged feet visible beneath the hem, and Adam's protective stance nearby. Understanding dawned in her face. Well, you both must come in and tell me everything, she said, ushering them toward the door. Charlotte has been asking for you every day, Margaret. She'll be overjoyed to have you back. The next hour passed in a blur of explanations, tears, and Charlotte's excited chatter. Mrs. Abernathy listened with growing concern as Margaret recounted her failed attempt to reach San Antonio, carefully editing the story for her daughter's ears. Adam remained quietly supportive, adding details only when necessary and deflecting Mrs. Abernathy's effusive thanks for his assistance. "But what will you do now, dear?" Mrs. Abernathy asked when the story was complete. "You know you're welcome to stay here while you figure things out, but my home is small, and with my son's family coming for an extended visit next week." "I understand completely," Margaret assured her. "You've already done so much. I'll find something, perhaps a room to rent while I look for work." Adam, who had been silent for some time, cleared his throat. "If I may make a suggestion," he began carefully. "My ranch isn't large, but I've been thinking of expanding my operations. I could use help with the household management, record keeping, and such. There's a small cabin on the property. It was built for the previous owner's mother. It needs some work, but it would provide a place for you and Charlotte while you decide on your next steps." The room fell silent. Margaret stared at Adam, trying to process his unexpected offer. "That's very generous," she said finally. "But I couldn't possibly—" "It's not charity," Adam interrupted gently. "It's an exchange. Your skills for shelter and a fair wage. The arrangement would benefit us both." Mrs. Abernathy was watching them with keen interest, a knowing look in her eyes that made Margaret uncomfortable. "It sounds like a practical solution," the older woman offered, "and it would give you time to consider your options without the pressure of immediate need." Margaret looked down at Charlotte, who had climbed into her lap during the conversation and was now playing contentedly with a button on Margaret's borrowed dress, blissfully unaware of the adult concerns being discussed. The offer was tempting more than tempting. It would provide immediate shelter and income, allow her to keep Charlotte with her, and give her time to make more permanent plans. Yet accepting meant placing her future and her daughters in the hands of a man she had known for barely a day, no matter how kind he had proven to be. "I would need to think about it," Margaret said carefully, "and discuss it with Charlotte." Adam nodded, his expression understanding. "Of course. There's no rush to decide. Why don't you stay here tonight, talk it over with Mrs. Abernathy and Charlotte, and I'll return tomorrow morning." "Whatever you decide, I'm happy to help in any way I can." The reasonableness of his response, the lack of pressure, only confirmed Margaret's growing impression of Adam's character. He was not a man who made demands or expected gratitude for his assistance. "Thank you," she said simply. "That would be best." After Adam took his leave, promising to return the following day, Margaret found herself subjected to Mrs. Abernathy's gentle but persistent questioning. "He seems a good man," the older woman observed as they prepared the evening meal, Charlotte occupied with her dolls in the small parlor. "He is," Margaret agreed. "He took me in during the storm, cared for my injured feet, and asked nothing in return." Mrs. Abernathy's knowing smile made Margaret flush. "And he's not hard on the eyes either, if an old woman may say so." "Mrs. Abernathy," Margaret protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "It's not like that at all. He's simply being kind." The older woman hummed noncommittally. "Well, kindness is a rare enough quality these days, especially in a man. If I were you, I'd consider his offer carefully. A woman alone with a child faces many challenges in this world. Margaret couldn't argue with that assessment. The past months had taught her just how precarious her position was, how quickly security could vanish, how doors closed to a widow with a child in tow. I know, she sighed, but I barely know him. Taking Charlotte to a remote ranch, being dependent on his goodwill, it's a risk. Life is full of risks, my dear, Mrs. Abernathy said gently. The question is which ones are worth taking. That night, after Charlotte had fallen asleep curled against her side, Margaret lay awake considering her limited options. She could try again for San Antonio, but the memory of her disastrous first attempt made her hesitant. She could seek work in Austin, but finding a position that would allow her to keep Charlotte with her would be difficult, and paying for lodgings would consume most of her earnings. Adam's offer provided an immediate solution to her most pressing concerns, but it came with its own uncertainties. What if the arrangement didn't work out? What if his kindness was temporary? What if? Margaret's thoughts drifted to Adam himself, his quiet strength, his compassion without condescension, the way he had treated Charlotte with genuine interest rather than the indulgent dismissal many adults showed to children. There was something steady about him that inspired trust, despite the brevity of their acquaintance. By morning, Margaret had reached a decision. When Adam returned, driving the same small wagon as the day before, she was waiting on Mrs. Abernathy's porch with Charlotte beside her and their few belongings packed. "We would like to accept your offer," she said simply when he approached. "On a trial basis. If it doesn't suit either of us, there will be no hard feelings." Adam's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features. "Fair enough," he agreed, extending his hand to seal the arrangement. Margaret placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. It was a business arrangement, she reminded herself firmly. Nothing more. Yet she couldn't quite suppress the flutter in her chest as their hands met, or the sense that this moment marked the beginning of something significant. Charlotte, watching the exchange with solemn eyes, tugged at Adam's sleeve. "Do you have horses at your ranch, Mr. Evans?" "Mama says I can't have a pony in town, but maybe in the country." Adam crouched down to Charlotte's level, his expression serious but kind. "I do have horses, Miss Charlotte, and if your mama agrees, perhaps you might learn to ride a gentle one once you're settled." Charlotte's eyes widened with delight. She looked up at Margaret pleadingly. "Can I, Mama, please?" Margaret couldn't help but smile at her daughter's excitement. "We'll see, sweetheart. First, we need to get settled in our new home." The word home felt strange on her lips, applied to a place she had never seen. Yet as they bid farewell to Mrs. Abernathy and climbed into Adam's wagon, Charlotte chattering excitedly about horses and adventures, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. The journey back to Adam's ranch was different from their previous trip. Charlotte's presence filled the wagon with constant questions and observations, her natural exuberance drawing smiles from both adults. Adam answered each inquiry with patient attention, explaining the workings of the wagon, identifying birds and plants they passed, and describing the ranch that awaited them. "It's not a grand place," he cautioned, glancing at Margaret, "but it's peaceful and there's room to breathe." "After Austin, any space will seem luxurious," Margaret replied. "Charlotte and I don't need much, just a roof and 4 walls." "You'll have more than that," Adam promised. "The cabin I mentioned, it's simple but solid. It has 2 small rooms and a stone fireplace. It needs cleaning and some repairs, but it should be comfortable enough once we've fixed it up." Margaret was touched by his concern for their comfort. "It sounds perfect, and I meant what I said about working. I want to earn our keep, not be a charity case." Adam's expression grew serious. You could never be that, Margaret. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. His quiet sincerity silenced her, and for a moment their eyes held. Charlotte's excited squeal broke the moment as she spotted a jackrabbit bounding across the road ahead. By mid-afternoon, they had reached Adam's property. Seeing it in full daylight, without the obscuring curtain of rain, Margaret was struck by the simple beauty of the place. The main house sat on a gentle rise, surrounded by oak trees that provided welcome shade. Beyond stretched modest pastures where cattle grazed, and further out, the land rose into rocky hills covered with scrubby vegetation. Adam directed the wagon past the main house toward a smaller structure, nestled among a cluster of mesquite trees about 100 yards away. The cabin he had described was indeed modest, a one-story building constructed of stone and timber, with a small porch across the front and a chimney rising from one end. "It needs work," Adam said as he brought the wagon to a stop, "but the roof is sound, and the walls are sturdy." Charlotte was already scrambling to get down, eager to explore their new surroundings. Margaret followed more carefully, taking in the cabin with a practiced eye. Despite its neglected appearance, the porch boards warped in places, the windows dusty, vines creeping up one wall. She could see the potential. "When can we go in?" Charlotte asked, bouncing on her toes with impatience. "Let's unload the wagon first," Adam suggested. "Then we can take a proper look." The three of them worked together to carry their few possessions to the porch. Adam had thoughtfully brought basic supplies, bedding, cookware, some preserved food to tide them over until they could make more permanent arrangements. Charlotte was assigned the important task of carrying the lightest items, which she did with exaggerated care, proud to be helping. Finally, Adam produced an iron key and unlocked the cabin door. It swung open with a creak of protest, releasing the musty smell of a space long closed up. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the dirty windows, illuminating a simple main room with a stone fireplace along one wall and a few pieces of furniture covered in sheets. "It hasn't been used since the previous owner's mother passed on about 3 years ago," Adam explained as they entered. "I kept meaning to clean it up, but never found the time or reason." Margaret moved through the space, mentally cataloging what needed to be done. Despite the dust and neglect, the cabin was structurally sound and, surprisingly, quite charming. The main room was larger than she had expected, with enough space for a small dining table and chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and a modest kitchen area with a cast iron stove. A doorway led to a second room, smaller but adequate for a bedroom. It contained a bed frame with a straw mattress that would need replacing, a simple dresser, and a window that overlooked a small, overgrown garden patch. "What do you think?" Adam asked from the doorway, watching as Margaret ran her hand along the smooth wooden surface of the dresser, wiping away years of dust. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "With some cleaning and a few repairs, it will be more than adequate." Charlotte had been investigating every corner of both rooms with the curiosity typical of her age. Now she appeared at Margaret's side, her face serious. "Can I have a garden, Mama, like the one at home?" Margaret felt a pang at the mention of their former house in Austin, where Charlotte had tended a small patch of flowers and vegetables with childish enthusiasm. "Of course, sweetheart. Look," she said, leading Charlotte to the window. "There's already a garden space outside. It needs weeding and planting, but it could be yours." Charlotte pressed her nose to the glass, her eyes wide with excitement. "Can we start today?" "Soon," Margaret promised. "First, we need to make this cabin livable. That means cleaning, lots of cleaning." "I'll help," Charlotte declared. "I'm a good cleaner." Adam, who had been watching their exchange with a quiet smile, spoke up. "I've brought water and some cleaning supplies, and I can have the old mattress replaced by tomorrow. For tonight, you're welcome to stay in the main house." Margaret shook her head firmly. "Thank you, but we'll manage here. The sooner we make this our home, the better." "In that case, let me at least help with the initial cleaning," Adam offered. "4 hands will make quicker work than 2. "And mine too," Charlotte added, holding up her small hands. "That's 6. Margaret couldn't help but laugh. "So it is. Very well, Mr. Evans. We accept your assistance this once." The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Adam brought more water from the well near the main house, while Margaret organized their cleaning efforts. Charlotte was given the task of gathering sticks and small branches for kindling, which kept her happily occupied while the adults tackled the dusty interior. Working alongside Adam, Margaret was struck again by his quiet efficiency and consideration. He seemed to anticipate her needs, bringing fresh water just as she was running low, moving furniture without being asked so she could sweep beneath it. There was an easy rhythm to their shared labor, a comfortable silence broken occasionally by practical questions or Charlotte's excited reports on her kindling collection. By evening, the cabin, while still in need of work, had been transformed. The floors were swept, the windows washed to let in the golden light of sunset, the fireplace cleared of old ashes and ready for a new fire. Adam had brought fresh straw for the mattress as a temporary measure until a proper replacement could be found, and Margaret had made up the bed with clean linens from their supplies. "It already feels like home," Margaret said softly, looking around the main room where a fire now crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the simple furnishings. Adam, who was preparing to return to the main house for the night, paused at the door. "I'm glad. Tomorrow we can work on the rest. The porch needs some boards replaced, and that garden should be cleared if Charlotte wants to plant." Charlotte, who had been fighting sleep for the past hour, perked up at the mention of the garden. "Can we plant flowers and carrots? I like carrots." "Flowers and carrots it is," Adam agreed with a smile. "But now, I think it's time for little girls to sleep after such a busy day." Margaret nodded in agreement. "Bath first, or what passes for one with our limited supplies, then bed." As Adam took his leave, promising to return in the morning with breakfast and tools for the repairs, Margaret felt a curious mixture of emotions. Gratitude, certainly, for his generosity and help. Relief at having found a solution, however temporary, to their housing predicament. But there was something else too, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire blazing in the hearth, and everything to do with the man who had just closed the cabin door behind him. She pushed the feeling aside as she helped a sleepy Charlotte wash with water warmed by the fire, then tucked her into the freshly made bed. There was no place in her life right now for such complications, she reminded herself firmly. She needed to focus on providing stability for Charlotte, on rebuilding their lives after the devastation of Thomas's death. Yet as she lay beside her daughter in the quiet darkness, listening to the night sounds of the Texas countryside filtering through the open window, Margaret couldn't help but wonder what the coming days would bring in this new chapter of their lives. The following weeks established a routine that brought unexpected comfort to Margaret and Charlotte. Each morning, they would wake with the sun, prepare a simple breakfast in their now clean cabin, and set about the day's tasks. Adam had proven true to his word about the work. Margaret kept the books for the ranch, managed the household affairs, and helped with various chores that benefited from an extra pair of hands. Charlotte thrived in their new environment. Her garden, cleared and prepared with Adam's help, now sprouted rows of vegetables and wildflowers. She had adopted a stray kitten found in the barn, naming it Whiskers with the solemn certainty of a child who believes names should describe their bearers. And true to his promise, Adam had begun teaching her to ride on a gentle old mare named Daisy, whose patience matched Charlotte's enthusiasm. For Margaret, the transformation was more subtle but no less profound. The constant anxiety that had been her companion since Thomas's illness began had gradually receded, replaced by a cautious optimism about their future. The modest wage Adam paid her, combined with their free lodging, allowed her to save for the first time in years. More importantly, she had regained a sense of competence and purpose that had been missing during the dark days following her husband's death. And then there was Adam himself. Day by day, Margaret's initial wariness had given way to genuine respect and friendship. She had learned that beneath his quiet exterior lay a thoughtful mind, dry humor, and deep compassion. He was a man of principle who treated everyone from the occasional ranch hands he hired to little Charlotte with the same basic dignity. They often shared evening meals, sometimes at the main house, sometimes at the cabin, depending on the day's work. These meals had evolved from somewhat formal affairs into comfortable gatherings where conversation flowed easily. Charlotte adored these times, always full of stories about her day's adventures, which Adam listened to with flattering attention. It was after one such dinner, with Charlotte finally asleep after much protest, that Margaret and Adam sat on the cabin's now repaired porch in the cooling evening air. The summer was giving way to early autumn, bringing relief from the Texas heat and painting the sunset in spectacular colors. "I received a letter from my cousin in San Antonio today," Margaret said, breaking the companionable silence. Adam turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. "Oh," she was concerned when I didn't arrive as planned. "I wrote to her weeks ago explaining what happened, but you know how mail can be out here." Margaret smoothed her skirt absently. "She still has a position for me at the boarding house if I want it." The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Their arrangement had always been described as temporary, a stepping stone while Margaret determined her next move. But as days stretched into weeks, neither had mentioned an end date. "I see," Adam said finally. "And do you want it that is?" Margaret looked out at the darkening landscape, considering her answer. "I don't know. A few months ago it seemed like the only solution. Now—" She hesitated, unsure how to express the complicated feelings that had developed during her time at the ranch. "Charlotte has never been happier," she continued. "She's flourishing here, and the work I enjoy it more than I expected." "You're good at it," Adam said simply. "Better than good. The ranch has never run more efficiently." Margaret smiled at the compliment. "Thank you. But I can't help feeling that I'm taking advantage of your generosity. This was meant to be a temporary arrangement." Adam was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate, as if he was choosing each word with care. "What if it wasn't temporary?" he asked. "What if you and Charlotte stayed permanently?" Margaret's heart skipped a beat. "As your employees, you mean?" Adam turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "No, Margaret, that's not what I mean." He took a deep breath, seeming to gather his courage. "I've been alone for a long time. After the war, I didn't think I wanted anything else, just peace and quiet and my own piece of land. But these past weeks, with you and Charlotte here, it's like the ranch has come alive again." "Like I've come alive again." Margaret found herself unable to speak, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "I know it's too soon," Adam continued. "You're still grieving Thomas, and I respect that. But I needed you to know that there's a place for you here, both of you, for as long as you want it. And perhaps, someday, if you came to feel even a fraction of what I feel for you." He trailed off, looking away as if embarrassed by his own declaration. Margaret reached out impulsively, placing her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. "Adam," she said softly, waiting until he looked at her again. "I won't pretend I haven't thought about it, about us. But you're right, it is soon. Thomas has been gone just over 2 months. And Charlotte, she's only beginning to adjust to life without her father." "I understand," Adam said quickly. "I shouldn't have spoken." "No," Margaret insisted, tightening her grip on his hand. "I'm glad you did. Because the truth is, I don't want to leave, not yet, maybe not ever, but I need time. We need time, all three of us, to be sure." The tension in Adam's shoulders eased and a cautious hope lit his eyes. "Time I can give," he said. "As much as you need." Margaret smiled, feeling a weight lift from her heart. "Then let's not make any decisions yet. Let's just see where this road takes us." Adam nodded, turning his hand beneath hers so their palms met, fingers intertwining with a naturalness that felt both surprising and inevitable. They sat in silence as darkness fell completely, the first stars appearing in the vast Texas sky. Margaret knew there were still many challenges ahead: grief to process, a child to raise, a future to build. But for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt the stirring of something that had been missing for too long: not just hope, but possibility. The possibility of happiness, of a new beginning, of a love she hadn't been looking for but had somehow found anyway. And for tonight, that was enough. The seasons changed, summer giving way to the milder days of autumn. The transformation of the land mirrored the changes in Margaret herself, subtle at first, then increasingly undeniable. The sharp edges of her grief had softened, not disappearing entirely but becoming a part of her rather than defining her. In its place grew a quiet contentment, punctuated by moments of unexpected joy. Charlotte blossomed in the freedom of ranch life. She had graduated from riding Daisy to a slightly more spirited pony that Adam had acquired specifically for her, though he pretended it was a necessary ranch purchase. Her garden produced a modest harvest that she proudly contributed to their meals, and her friendship with Adam deepened into a bond that warmed Margaret's heart to witness. As for Margaret and Adam, they moved forward with careful steps. Their evenings on the porch became a cherished ritual, a time for conversation that ranged from practical ranch matters to deeper discussions of hopes and memories. Adam spoke of his experiences during the war, painful memories he had shared with few others, and Margaret revealed her own struggles, the doubts and fears that had plagued her as Thomas's illness progressed. On a crisp November evening, with the first real chill of winter in the air, Adam invited Margaret to ride with him to a place on the property she hadn't yet seen. Charlotte was having a special overnight visit with Mrs. Abernathy in Austin, a treat the older woman had insisted upon, saying she missed the child's lively presence. "It's a bit of a ride," Adam warned as he helped Margaret mount one of his gentler horses, "but I think you'll find it worth the journey." They rode for nearly an hour, following a narrow trail that wound through rocky terrain and stands of oak and mesquite. The land rose gradually, offering increasingly expansive views of the surrounding countryside. Margaret, who had become a competent if not enthusiastic rider during her months at the ranch, found herself enjoying the excursion more than she had anticipated. Finally, they crested a hill, and Adam drew his horse to a stop. "We're here," he said simply, dismounting and coming to help Margaret down. Here was a natural clearing at the highest point of Adam's property. From this vantage, the entire ranch spread out below them, the main house and cabin tiny in the distance. Beyond, the landscape stretched to the horizon, painted in the golds and russets of autumn. "It's beautiful," Margaret breathed, turning slowly to take in the 360-degree view. "I come here sometimes to think," Adam said, leading her to a flat rock that formed a natural seat overlooking the most spectacular part of the vista. especially when decisions need making. They sat side by side, close enough that Margaret could feel the warmth of him against the cooling air. For a while, they simply enjoyed the view in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in deepening shades of orange and pink. "I've been thinking," Adam said finally, his voice quiet but clear in the stillness, "about what you said that night on the porch about needing time." Margaret turned to look at him, her heart quickening at the seriousness in his tone. "Yes, I've respected that, Margaret. I've tried not to rush you or pressure you in any way." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "But I find myself hoping that you might be ready to hear what I have to say now." Margaret nodded, unable to form words past the sudden tightness in her throat. Adam took her hand gently in his. "When you and Charlotte came into my life, you changed everything. This land, this ranch, it was just a place before. A quiet place, a peaceful place, but empty somehow. Now it's a home again." He looked out at the view, then back at her, his blue eyes intense. "I love you, Margaret. I think I've loved you since that first morning, watching you mend my shirts with such fierce determination to maintain your dignity despite everything. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you've raised Charlotte to be both gentle and brave." Margaret felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were different from the tears of grief that had been her constant companion for so long. These were tears of a different sort entirely. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both monumental and perfectly natural. "I wasn't looking for this for you. I thought that part of my life was over, but somehow—" "Somehow," Adam agreed, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Margaret, I'm not trying to replace Thomas. I know he'll always have a place in your heart, in Charlotte's memories." "I know that," she assured him, "and I'm grateful for it. Thomas would want us to be happy to move forward." Adam nodded, his expression solemn yet hopeful. "Then I have something to ask you." He shifted slightly, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small object that caught the fading sunlight. "It was my mother's," he explained, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. Nothing fancy, but it was precious to her. Margaret's breath caught as Adam slid from the rock to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Margaret Lawson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you and Charlotte make this ranch your permanent home, not as guests or employees, but as my family?" Time seemed to suspend as Margaret looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly, who had offered shelter when she needed it most, and who now offered his heart with the same quiet generosity. In his eyes, she saw not just love but a promise of care, of respect, of partnership in whatever lay ahead. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain despite the tears that now flowed freely. "Yes, Adam, we would be honored." His face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features, revealing a joy so pure it took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, his embrace both gentle and fiercely protective. Their first kiss was tender, a promise sealed in the glow of sunset, with the land that would be their shared legacy spread out below them. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he said, a hint of laughter in his voice, "that Charlotte has been campaigning for this outcome for weeks now. She's likely to be insufferably pleased with herself." Margaret laughed, the sound carrying across the open hilltop. "She's a clever girl. Apparently she saw what we were only beginning to understand." "That she is," Adam agreed, "and she's going to make a wonderful daughter." The word daughter sent a warm flood of emotion through Margaret. Charlotte, who had lost so much so young, would now have not just security and stability, but a father who already loved her as his own. As they mounted their horses for the ride back to the ranch back home, Margaret felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The road that had begun with a desperate barefoot journey had led her not just to shelter and bread, but to a love she hadn't believed possible, and a future brighter than any she had dared imagine. The wedding took place on a clear December day, with the winter sunlight casting a golden glow over the small gathering assembled in the town church. Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on hosting a proper celebration, declaring that a union of such obvious rightness deserved more than a quiet ceremony. Margaret wore a dress of deep blue, newly made for the occasion with fabric Adam had insisted on purchasing on one of his supply trips to Austin. Charlotte, beaming with importance in her role as flower girl, wore a matching ribbon in her golden curls and carried a small bouquet of winter blossoms gathered from the ranch's protected spots. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Margaret and Adam exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not just of love and fidelity but of partnership and respect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Charlotte's delighted clapping led the assembled guests in applause. The celebration afterward, held at Mrs. Abernathy's home, was a joyous affair filled with food, music, and well wishes from the small community that had come to know and respect both Margaret and Adam. Charlotte danced with everyone who would partner with her, her happiness so contagious that even the most reserved guests found themselves smiling. As the festivities continued into the evening, Margaret found a quiet moment with her new husband on Mrs. Abernathy's back porch. "Happy?" Adam asked, his arm around her waist. Margaret leaned into his embrace, watching through the window as Charlotte demonstrated her new pony's trotting gait to an admiring audience. "More than I thought possible," she admitted. "It feels almost unreal, like a dream I might wake from." Adam tightened his hold. "Not a dream," he assured her. "Though I understand the feeling. 6 months ago I was a solitary rancher with little prospect of change. Now I find myself a husband and father, responsibilities I never thought I'd have or want. Any regrets?" Margaret asked, looking up at him. Adam's answer was a kiss, gentle but full of promise. "Not one," he said when they parted. "And you? Are you ready for the life of a rancher's wife?" Margaret smiled, thinking of the home that awaited them, not the small cabin where she and Charlotte had started their time at the ranch, but the main house that was now theirs together. "More than ready. Though I warn you, I may continue to use that cabin as a quiet place for reading and sewing. I've grown fond of it. It's yours whenever you want it," Adam promised. "Though I hope you'll spend most nights in our home." The warmth in his voice, the intimacy implied, brought a blush to Margaret's cheeks. Though they had grown increasingly close in the weeks leading to their wedding, they had maintained propriety, mindful of Charlotte's presence and their own desire to begin their marriage with traditional respect. "I plan to," she assured him, her voice soft but certain. The sound of Charlotte's laughter drew their attention back inside. The child was now sitting on Adam's foreman's knee, apparently regaling him with a story that had the usually stoic man chuckling. "She's going to fall asleep on the ride home," Margaret predicted. "Probably before we're halfway there," Adam agreed. "But that's all right. It's been a big day for all of us." As Margaret had foreseen, Charlotte was indeed asleep within minutes of their departure from town, nestled between them in the wagon as they made their way back to the ranch under a canopy of stars. The winter night was cold but clear, the road illuminated by moonlight that turned the landscape to silver. Adam drove with one hand, his other arm around Margaret, who leaned against his shoulder, Charlotte's warm weight against her other side. The sense of completion, of family, was so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "I never expected this," she whispered, not wanting to wake Charlotte. "After Thomas died, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever, that Charlotte and I would go on alone making the best of things." Adam's arm tightened around her. "Life has a way of surprising us. When I pulled open that door during the storm and found you standing there, it was like something out of a storybook, the kind my mother used to read to me and Sarah." "A bedraggled widow with bleeding feet doesn't seem very storybook to me," Margaret said with a soft laugh. "You've never seen yourself clearly," Adam countered. "Even then, half drowned and exhausted, there was something about you, a dignity, a strength." "I knew you were extraordinary before you spoke a single word." The simple sincerity in his voice humbled her. "I'm just a woman who did what she had to do," she said. "But I'm grateful beyond words that my desperate journey led me to your door." They fell silent as the ranch came into view, the main house dark but welcoming. Home, Margaret thought, in a way no place had been since her childhood. Not because of the building itself, modest though comfortable, but because of the people who filled it, this man beside her, this child between them, the family they had formed against all odds. As Adam helped her down from the wagon, Charlotte still sleeping in his arms, Margaret felt a certainty settle in her heart. The road ahead would have its challenges, life always did, but they would face them together. The barefoot widow and the solitary rancher, brought together by chance or providence, now bound by something stronger than either had imagined possible. It was, she thought, as they crossed the threshold of their shared home, the beginning of a new journey. One she looked forward to with hope, with joy, and with love that had found her when she least expected it but needed it most. As the seasons changed and the years passed, the Evans Ranch flourished under the combined care of Adam and Margaret. What had once been a modest operation grew steadily, becoming known throughout the county for its quality livestock and fair dealings. The small cabin where Margaret and Charlotte had first stayed became a guest house for occasional visitors, though Margaret still claimed it sometimes as her personal retreat for reading or sewing during busy times. Charlotte grew from a spirited child into a confident young woman, her natural intelligence nurtured by both Margaret's patient teaching and Adam's practical knowledge. By the time she was 12, she could ride as well as any ranch hand, keep basic accounts, and negotiate with traders who sometimes underestimated the young girl with golden curls and her mother's determination. The family expanded 2 years after Margaret and Adam's wedding with the birth of their son, Samuel, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and quiet demeanor. 3 years later came Rebecca, dark-haired and curious, who seemed determined from her earliest days to keep up with her older siblings. Life was not without its challenges. The drought of 1882 tested every rancher in the region, including Adam. There were difficult decisions to be made, lean times to weather. But through it all, the foundation they had built of mutual respect, shared labor, and deep love remained unshaken. On a warm evening in the spring of 1886, almost exactly 10 years after Margaret had first stumbled onto Adam's porch, she found him sitting on the hilltop where he had proposed. It was their special place, a retreat they sought out for important conversations or moments of reflection. "I thought I might find you here," she said, settling beside him on the familiar flat rock. "The children are all asleep, even Charlotte, though she insisted she's too old for a bedtime." Adam smiled, taking her hand in his as naturally as breathing. 15 is a difficult age, too old for childhood, too young for adulthood. She's navigating it well, though." "She is," Margaret agreed. "She has her heart set on that school in Boston. The letter came today while you were checking the north pasture." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "I saw it on your desk. She's been accepted then, with a partial scholarship. She's ecstatic, though trying to appear calm and mature about it. Margaret squeezed his hand. "It's a wonderful opportunity, Adam." "It is," he agreed, though she could hear the hint of sadness in his voice. "And she deserves it. Her mind is too sharp to waste." "But," Margaret prompted gently. Adam sighed, looking out over the land they had tended together for a decade. "But I'll miss her terribly. We all will. Boston is so far away." "It is," Margaret acknowledged, feeling the same bittersweet conflict. "But she'll come back for holidays. And it's only for schooling. She's made it clear she considers the ranch her home." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Margaret studied her husband's profile, still handsome despite the lines that 10 years of Texas weather and ranching life had added. His hair had more gray now, especially at the temples, but his eyes remained as clear and blue as when they had first met. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking in a desperate widow and her child that night, changing the course of your life?" Adam turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "Regret it? Margaret, that storm was the greatest blessing of my life. It brought you to me. Even with the complications, a ready-made family, a woman still grieving her husband, all the adjustments you had to make." "Even with all that," he assured her. "Though I'll admit, I had no idea what I was getting into when I opened that door." His smile softened the words. "I just saw a woman who needed help. I never imagined she would help me even more, show me what I was missing, what life could be." Margaret leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I was thinking earlier today about that journey, those 10 miles barefoot after my boots fell apart, how desperate I felt, how certain that everything was falling apart beyond repair." "And now?" Adam asked. Margaret gestured toward the ranch below, where their home stood welcoming in the evening light. "Now I know it was just the beginning. A difficult beginning, but necessary to bring me here, to this life, to you." Adam's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "To think I almost didn't hear your knock that night. The storm was so loud and I was in the back room." "But you did hear," Margaret said simply. "And you opened the door." "Best decision I ever made," Adam declared, pressing a kiss to her temple. As they sat together watching the sunset, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate widow to cherished wife, from solitary rancher to loving husband and father, they had traveled a greater distance than mere miles could measure. And it had all begun with a storm, a knock on a door, and the simple human kindness of shelter offered when it was needed most. "We should head back," Adam said eventually, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "The children will be waiting for their goodnight stories." "Samuel and Rebecca will be," Margaret corrected with a smile. "Charlotte will be pretending she's too grown for such things while listening from her doorway." Adam laughed, the sound warm and familiar. He stood and offered his hand to help Margaret up, but didn't release it once she was standing. Instead, he drew her into his arms for a kiss that, even after 10 years, still made her heart skip. "I love you, Mrs. Evans," he said softly when they parted. "More today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you," Margaret replied, the words as true now as when she had first spoken them on this very spot. "My shelter in every storm." Hand in hand, they made their way down the hillside toward the lights of home, where their children waited, and their shared life continued to unfold, a journey neither had planned but both had embraced. Step by step, day by day, with faith in each other and in the love that had found them when they needed it most.